Oh, you weren't lying. You weren't lying, Chris. Everybody on the YouTube feed can see. Joining us right now. As I walked back in the room during the break, Chris turned to me and he said, "You're about to see the best background we've ever seen." And Brody Brazil,
Your Honor,
holds that trophy. But Brody's got competition. As Dan Roberts, the editor-in-chief of Front Office Sports, joins us. That is a very editor-in-chiefy background, by the way, as well. Dan, I'm Dave. Good morning. How are you?
Thank you, gentlemen. Yep, coming at you from the FOS studio in New York. Good to be on.
So is that's a legit background? That is fantastic. That is really an excellent look. And dare I say to others watching, both live and taped, let that be a lesson to you. The professionalism, the look overall. Maybe you didn't hear of Front Office Sports before, and if you didn't, shame on you. But now when you see that type of background coming, you got to believe that the information coming from Front Office Sports is as quality as that background, Dan.
Yeah, that's right. And I hope your listeners do know FOS. Been covering the business of sports since 2015. A lot of people read our 2 daily newsletters and then, of course, breaking news on the site and doing a lot more video opportunities here in our studio. So, of course, all this week we've been all over the NBA ratings story.
Yep, and not only that, by the way, did you see the plug? And then did you see the transition from the guest? All right, I'm ready to go. This is fantastic. So, yeah, that's why we're having you on, and we appreciate your time. This is a cyclical conversation. You've been in the business long enough. You know that every once in a while it's what's wrong with XYZ sport. Well, I can tell you, I saw the NBA valuations year on year. And for example, the Sacramento Kings here increased by 19% year on year. That's a net increase of around $700 to $800 million. Nobody's the NFL, Dan. But when you look at the TV revenue, the deals that were just signed, when you look at the year-on-year franchise valuations, when you look on the almost certainly $10 billion coming into the owners through expansion over the next 2, 3, 4 years to likely Seattle and Vegas, in your opinion, is this being overblown, or are there legit worry signs for the NBA?
Yes and no, as always, right?
Yeah.
You know, the truth lies somewhere in between. The NBA is doing just fine. Let's get that out of the way, right? And I wrote a column on this a few weeks ago. I think I concluded buy the dip. In other words, to be existentially concerned about the future of the NBA based on ratings right now would be silly and short-sighted. And by the way, even the NFL juggernaut had its own ratings issue 2 years ago. I'm sorry, I should say for 2 years, a few years back. I think it was 2017 and 2018. It was tied up with the Kaepernick protests and the Trump era. It wasn't just political, but NBA ratings did decline about 9% 2 seasons in a row, the NFL, I should say. And that was sort of fascinating. And now, of course, you look at the NFL, they're doing just fine, up only, all the numbers are up. NBA will be fine. Look at their social media following. It's the social media league. Look at their global fan base. However, a 19% dip compared to last year is significant. It is a story. The league at first, for a few weeks behind the scenes, guys, they were sort of trying to soften this and say, you know, this isn't much of a story and you have to have the context. It is now a pretty big story, and I would argue that in the last week, I mean, look at the fact that we're talking, it kind of went mainstream, and the average sports fan became aware of this narrative, and we can talk about what the causes might be. So, you know, is the NBA in trouble? No. Was the new broadcast deal for $77 billion, did those companies overpay? Probably not. You mentioned team valuations. I always think those are so ballparked and you know, rough math. Probably every single one of these teams could sell for higher than their valuation right now. All those things are doing fine, but it's a significant ratings decline, and it's worth exploring why we're seeing it.
Dan Roberts joining us from Front Office Sports. I have a rule in the chat where we stay away from politics for obvious reasons, but that is the elephant in the room here, so let's responsibly do this. With football, you tied that in with the Kaepernick protests, with kneeling, with all of that, the outspoken and political nature some players and teams had, and it was quite the environment, let's just say, at that time with COVID, everything else. Now you have some of the same conversations when people are trying to discern the ratings drop with the NBA, where you have coaches like Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich being outspoken about their politics. You have different initiatives, things that there are some in the fan base. I'm not judging. I'm just saying there are some in the fan base that say this is woke or get politics out of the equation. In your opinion, do you think that the NBA fall off has anything to do with the political nature of things at all?
Close to nothing so far,
Okay.
if I had
Yep.
to bet. Now,
Okay.
and let me be clear with the NFL, that was certainly part of it. It wasn't the whole thing, but I think it
Sure.
was part of it. And I don't think it's political to say, by the way, that when the current president is out there tweeting relentlessly about your league and criticizing, I'm speaking about Trump and the NFL years ago, that has an effect.
Sure.
So by the way, just wait until, President Trump takes office and sets his sights on the NBA. Who knows? But right now, I don't think it's political. You're certainly right that people love to say, oh, the NBA is woke. And let's also remember another example where it wasn't just smoke, it was a legitimate story. But the NBA had quite a kerfuffle with China years
That's
back.
right.
And Daryl Morey and what he said about China and Hong Kong protesters. That was a real story that had a real impact. Right now, what do I think? I think there's a panoply of things, each of which is kind of legitimate. Shaq says too many threes. Barkley says fans are paying a lot of money to go to the game and they're not seeing the star play because the star is resting. These guys are making $95 million. They can't play 2 games 2 nights in a row. So load management, call that whatever you want. Player injuries, players sitting to rest their legs, whatever you want to call that. That's something. That's a real thing. You ask me, the biggest factor, it's kind of a long season. And people aren't really necessarily eager to watch a week 2 regular season NBA game when they've got NFL still going on. They were up against the World Series at the beginning. They were up against the election. That's what Adam Silver blamed at first. Now, of course, we're weeks later, so you can't blame that anymore. But there's a lot of distraction. It's easy to backseat drive the commissioners. I mean, it's the worst job, being the commissioner. The money's good. But I would say I'd start the NBA season around Christmas. Now, a good retort this year is you say, well, wait a minute, the NFL is about to steal Christmas Day, too, with the Netflix games. But I think the NBA season could start later. Not going to happen, because in our day and age, every league, it needs to get bigger, bigger, bigger every year by revenue and more and more and more. They're not going to shrink. But it's a long season, just like the baseball season is a long season.
It can be too simplistic, and it's too many three-pointers. It's the games are too slow. The games are too fast. There's too many games. Could it just be as simple as it's James Harden? That's my opinion. I think it's James Harden and that type of foul baiting crap, but everyone's got an opinion.
Well, and I'll give you a few more, by the way, and it's hard for the league to control this, but I don't see that many exciting storylines so far this season. I'm a Celtics fan. I like that my team is killing it, but the number of threes is crazy. They're taking 53s a game. And let's remember also that last year's NBA Finals had a significant ratings dip. That led people to time to say, oh, is the deal too much? Again, you can't take the ratings from just one slice of the year and extrapolate and say, so then the TV deal isn't worth X, Y, Z. I mean, things on the open market, it's worth whatever companies are willing to pay, so $77 billion. But, a number of things out there. The stars are aging, Durant and Westbrook and LeBron and Curry, these guys are aging out. Who's going to be the next generation of young stars? Is it Wemby? I mean, the rest of the team isn't very good, but he's exciting. Is it Gilgeous-Alexander? I don't know. So right now, I think there's just not a ton of compelling, exciting things. I mean, I've watched one game, and it was the Celtics-Warriors matchup. That was one of the few primetime games that have rated very well. It was an exception to the ratings dip. That was exciting. Oh, I also watched Celtics-Cavs back when the Cavs, shockingly, were still undefeated.
So that's what, and again, everyone's going to have their opinions, and as you've kind of communicated clearly, it's not just any one thing, and the NBA is not in trouble, but there are always rooms around the margin to improve. The one that kind of adjacent to what you said, I just think a big part of it's rivalries. We don't have there's what are the big rivalries right now? Is Celtics Knicks okay? Kings Warriors, Kings late not no, who cares? I'm not going to come out and say, hey, there should be more fights. That's too simplistic. But you had Magic and Bird. You had the Pistons and the Celtics. You had the Bulls and the Pistons. You had the Bad Boys. You had Shaq and Kobe versus the world. You had, even a couple years ago here in Sacramento, the Kings Warriors was the most watched series, 7-game series of the entire playoffs, and it was a first-round series. It seems like everybody's just too high-five, huggy, and we'll play you and we'll go home. There's just not enough hate in the NBA these days.
I know what you mean, and again, it's hard for the league to manufacture it, but you don't see the same fire. And by the way, I mentioned I'm obviously a Celtics fan. I'm from Boston, but I also understand the people who think that team, as dominant as they are, isn't really that thrilling. I mean, are Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum the most charismatic stars in the league? I don't really think they are. I think Jaylen is kind of interesting in his brooding way, but I don't think Tatum has sort of the charisma and the star power needed to be the face of the league. When we talk about baseball this year, you talk about an age-old debate. Who's the face of baseball? Well, this year, MLB got its dream matchup. You had Judge versus Ohtani and the two coasts. In the NBA, I'm not sure anymore. The most exciting thing to happen this season, LeBron and Bronny were going to play together. So it happened. They were on the court 5 minutes. Bronny's back where he belongs in the G League. There's not that many exciting, thrilling storylines and rivalries. I think I agree with you. But again, those things are tough to have happen organically. And I also think, as you alluded to, there's just no stakes this early in the season. I mean, the NBA Cup is an obvious gambit to try to bring viewers in. It's year 2 of the Cup. Ratings for the Cup were down 10% versus last year's Cup. In year 2, you'd want to see that number go up. But it's so early in the season, and there's no stakes. Lakers won the Cup last year. It meant nothing for the playoffs.
Last thing for you, you mentioned markets as well, New York, LA, in baseball. Obviously, I think the NBA would love Warriors, Celtics, Lakers, Knicks, et cetera, et cetera. Yet you go over to the NFL, and the highest rated regular season game this year amongst all high rated games for the NFL was the Bills and the Chiefs. You're talking about Buffalo, New York. You're talking about Kansas City. And you look at some of these other Green Bay, for example. The NFL seems like it's almost market proof. I'm not saying Rams, Giants wouldn't turn numbers, but the NFL has done such a better job as opposed to the other leagues at market proofing themselves. Could the NBA, is there a way for the NBA to learn something from that, or is it an apples and oranges thing?
Well, I think what the league can do, and the point of the way the contracts are designed and the way the leagues are structured, is ideally you have parity where the new stars are being dispersed to different teams regardless of where the teams are. I mean, you don't have that in baseball. I was just in here talking with someone else about Juan Soto, and is the future that, the Steve Cohens are just going to come in with the hedge fund guys with the deep pockets, and 4 or 5 teams will always have stars for the rest of our lives. In the NBA and the NFL, you should hypothetically see more parity, and I think in the NFL you really have. I mean, that's why I realize I'm coming off as such a Boston guy, but that's why the Pats dynasty was so impressive and amazing. The way the NFL is designed, you're not supposed to be able to be this good for this long, one team. So all that said, your point about markets, now, on the other hand, the NFL is such a ratings guarantee. People will watch any game. Huge numbers for 2 teams that aren't good. But point being, those teams, the Bills and the Ravens and the Chiefs, are really good, and they're in a period of 4 or 5 seasons in a row where they're consistently really good. They have the stars. Detroit this year, that's exciting. And in the NBA, I think you have fewer loyalists now. People just watch for the individual stars and not necessarily their hometown. So what lesson could they learn? You mentioned Vegas off the top. I think we expect a team in Vegas. Vegas has been a really interesting thing. People said, it's a transient city, it's tourist, you can't have teams there. Suddenly we're going to have, NHL, NFL, and maybe an NBA team, and maybe eventually an MLB or an MLS team. So that's just, I don't know what to make of that other than I think people will watch if you have the stars and if the team is good. It's not easy.
On Front Office Sports today, amongst other things, Carmelo Anthony being in play for a possible NBA analyst job. All kinds of great stuff there. Follow them. Very simple. At FOS, as in Front Office Sports. Thanks to you, Dan. Thanks to your very nice background. I don't see any drones behind you, so I think we're okay. I was in Logan Airport last Sunday where they have all the banners from all the championships right as you go through security. And as a Sacramento guy, maybe want to puke. Maybe share them with other people, but I get it. Appreciate your time, brother.
Thanks, guys. Good fun.
All right, take care. That's Dan Roberts. We'll take a very quick break. When we come